Hello, I'm Melisa Idris.
And I am Ibrahim Sani.
Welcome to Consider This, the show that wants you to consider and then reconsider some of the news of the day. Now, we'll start the night with some good news today. Tun Dr. Siti Hasmah Muhammad Ali has been discharged from hospital where she was under treatment for food poisoning.
Of course, she was seen in a jovial mood coming out of the private hospital in Kuala Lumpur. She was being treated for food poisoning apparently, but Tun Dr. Mahathir did say that she's feeling jovial and is just coming back from a mild food poisoning situation. Of course, Tun Mahathir is currently in Vietnam for his 2-day state visit there.
Well, she was supposed to go with him for the state visit, but she was taken ill. So it's good that she is now on the mend, and we're, I guess, hoping that the Ibu Negara, because she was recently given that title, conferred the title of Ibu Negara by the think tank ASLI.
It's true in every sense of the word. Of course, it's a play of words for being the capital of the city, but yes,
but
indeed.
Also the mother,
she is the
mother of the nation, right?
Yes.
There you go. All right, now on to some disappointing news for me personally. The Economist Intelligence Unit, or the EIU better known, recently released its Safe Cities Index for 2019. And guess what? It ranked KL at 35th place out of 60 cities worldwide. What that means essentially is that KL has ranked below average as a safe place to live in.
Also important to note that the top of the list goes to Tokyo, followed by Singapore and another Japanese city, Osaka. And of course, when you think about how EIU rates a city being safe or otherwise, it's not just about the personal safety index of that particular city, but also many other situations as well, and many other matrices, including that of physical security.
Yeah, you know what? That was really interesting for me, because I never thought about it that way. You know, I only think about if you're ranking a city in terms of safety, I would think, oh yeah, my personal safety. I'm thinking about
like
crime. Yeah, on the street. How safe do I feel in my house? But now we're thinking about digital safety. We're thinking about cybersecurity related. We're thinking about infrastructure safety. How prepared are we when it comes to disaster planning? And even in terms of health security, what is the the access to high quality healthcare? Do we have a route if you are taken ill? Can ambulances get to you in time? Traffic congestions and all that.
There's also an important element of this, which is, of course, digital safety and digital security. If you're in a particular city rated within EIU's 60 cities, are you more likely or are you more prone to be ripped off your digital data, digital identity, or otherwise? So this is a sense where we realize that we are below average because we are ranked 35th in terms of all these matrices, including that of cybersecurity.
Yeah, and I think it's particularly concerning, not just because we're ranked 35th, but because we've fallen in the ranking. So we're actually going the other way instead of improving. So last year we were 31st in the ranking. This year falling 4 places.
But there is a silver lining. We are still above Beijing. We're still above Shanghai. We're still above all these megalopolis.
But we can't beat Singapore. Singapore's second.
There is a perennial problem, isn't it?
We can't beat Singapore.
Eventually we'll get there, I'm pretty sure.
The rivalry is strong. What can I say, isn't it? Well, on to other news. Now, we also have news that 16-year-old Swedish environmental activist Greta Thunberg has arrived in New York after a 15-day voyage across the Atlantic. She will be participating in the UN Climate Summit in New York City as well as in Chile. And
this is a very interesting bit because Swedish teen climate activist Greta Thunberg arrived in New York to chants and cheers on Wednesday after her Atlantic sailboat arrived at that particular place. It was argued that it was zero-emission travel, but I don't know whether it's really zero-emissions travel. Anyway, here is a clip of her arriving amidst hundreds of activists gathered around Hudson River in New York to cheer her arrival.
Yeah, it felt like something not out of my life, but something strange. I don't know how to explain it. It was a very weird moment. And to go from one extreme to be isolated and disconnected, just open sea, to all this, it's very strange and it's hard to, with the brain, to cope with it, and to also be welcomed so much by so many people. It was incredible.
So this is the argument whether or not it was really zero emissions travel, because if you fly from Stockholm to New York, it'll just take you about 12 hours. And the fact that she has traveled over 16 days on a so-called zero-emission yacht, one would argue what powered her there, other than the fact that she's been tweeting every hour while every single moment on that particular 16-day voyage. And not to mention, Melisa, the fact that that cabin needs to be warmed up.
Listen, there's renewable energy, right, that can reduce zero emissions. There's things as offsetting carbon emissions that can make it zero emission travel. Now, I have to say, the Greta Thunberg is more interesting because of the debate and conversation that she has generated with her method of environmental evangelicalism, right?
Yeah, okay, so that's the word, right? So, environmental evangelicalism.
And I don't mean that in a bad way.
Whether or not this is truly trying to promote something for the better. My question is she an institution or is she a 16-year-old person? And by the way, she's self-declared that on her Twitter bio, I'm a 16-year-old climate activist with Asperger. That's what she says on her Twitter bio.
So Asperger's, of course, is a form of autism, which she says that it allows her to see things from outside the box. So it helps her in her activism work. Now, I have to say, the critics of Greta say that she oversimplifies the problem of climate change. She says, we have all the solutions to climate change, we just need a change in our actions. She also, the critics of Greta also say, listen, a 16-year-old is not a legally responsible adult, therefore she cannot be open to robust criticism.
Yeah.
However, I completely disagree. I think that there are a lot of people who disagree with her brand of environmentalism, but I disagree when people say, when they use the age, her age against her.
Of course, you can. I agree with that. Just because she's young doesn't mean that she can't inspire. And while I question her method of traveling from one point to another, what I do want to recommend is that she is inspiring many others to actually look at climate change and whether or not climate activism can be this way instead of, say, climate terrorism or many other destructive ways of trying to get the message across.
What about Greta's school strikes, Ibrahim? What do you think about the, so what she's done essentially is that she encouraged teenagers as well as younger children to skip school to protest the climate change. So,
what harm does it do?
Yeah, a lot of people say this is bad influence. What do you think?
I don't think there's tangible harm. Nobody got hurt. I mean, just because you skip, we have skipped classes. Let's not kid ourselves. The fact that she wants to call for action, and indeed this is a problem that is meant for everyone to solve. Yes, that's an important part of, or important element for us to actually look at it. But whether or not that travel thing, that boat thing, I don't know, this is a media stunt for me.
Okay, all right. Well, something to consider tonight. What you think about Greta Thunberg. We're going to be back with more on Consider This, so stay tuned. Welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, with me Ibrahim, Sani. Now, in the lead up to our own Independence Day, let's turn our attention to one of the world's youngest nations, East Timor, or now known as Timor-Leste. Tomorrow, on August 30th, Timor-Leste will celebrate the 20th anniversary of the referendum that gave it its independence from Indonesia. Now, our colleague Sharad Kutin is there in Timor-Leste right now, and he joins us on the line. Good evening, Sharad. Now, can you tell us a little bit more about why you're there in Timor-Leste and not here in the studio with us?
Well, I'd like to say I'm on a holiday, but I'm not. I've come partly because I was involved in the Asia-Pacific Conference on East Timor in 1996. It was held in Kuala Lumpur, the second iteration of that conference. the solidarity movement was essential to drumming up support and creating visibility for the cause of East Timor before they achieved independence and before the Indonesian government was pressured into granting them a referendum. Now, I've just come from the presidential palace, and I've come across town. Delhi is actually quite small, and I've come across town to an open air area where there's a big concert going on, and you can hear the music at the back. And if you could just about hear the music, it's actually being sung in Bahasa Indonesia. A lot of people here still speak Bahasa Indonesia. Many of the elite speak Bahasa Indonesia. It's a fascinating place 20 years on.
Sharad, I just want to ask you about the Malaysian connection with Timor-Leste. Kamal Babat Haj, he was a student activist that was killed many years ago. Could you tell us a little bit more about him?
Well, Kamal was a Malaysian. His mother was from New Zealand. He was student he was a student in Australia. Had come to volunteer in 1991. What was going to be a kind of process of understanding what was happening in the territory occupied since the invasion of East Timor in the mid-70s. Now, Kamal was killed at the Santa Cruz massacre. I mean, Santa Cruz massacre was one of many massacres against the Timorese who resisted or for whatever reason found themselves up against the Indonesian military in the country. On the Santa Cruz massacre, and I'm not too far away from the Santa Cruz cemetery, one of the biggest issues then was that there was no visibility for this. The Malaysian media was actually quite silent. And if you cast your mind back to 1991, the RTM actually had images from the Santa Cruz massacre. They had to apologize to Indonesia for broadcasting that. Our Minister of Information actually flew to Jakarta to apologize personally to the Indonesian government. General Suharto was a powerful, powerful man in ASEAN in those days, and he kept the issue of East Timor very silent.
Right, Sharad. Okay, so let's talk about the past 20 years. 20 years ago, the people of East Timor voted overwhelmingly to reject Indonesia's plan for special autonomy. Instead, they wanted to pursue independence. Now, what has that reconciliation process been like? What are some of the, I guess, lessons that you've observed while you're there?
Well, you know, the numbers are staggering in the countries that were so small. Estimates are some 200,000 people died during the Indonesian occupation of Timor-Leste. 150,000 from a famine that happened in the late 70s, caused essentially by actions of the Indonesian government and the Indonesian military. So about 150,000. The remainder were just killed in various other kind of massacres and such. Now, coming up to the referendum that was brokered after Indonesia had its own reformasi and democratization process, B.J. Habibie, who's just had a bridge in Dili inaugurated in his name, he is seen, for all it's worth, seen as a man who had the courage to give the referendum process a chance. And what happened following that referendum, as you said, overwhelmingly the Timorese voted for independence and not autonomy as the Indonesians hoped, is that the Indonesians backed a militia, mostly manned by Timorese, that massacred people. They targeted the liberation movement leaders. They went on systematic rape, looting, and arson. They destroyed as much infrastructure as they could as this young nation was just beginning its journey. And it was because of the restraint of the independence forces that the international community was finally moved, and the big powers were finally moved to intervene in East Timor and to restore justice. Now, of course, a lot of problems here with peace and reconciliation. A lot of people who committed those murders and rapes not tried in court. So how do you find justice? That's a big question. Huge amount of processes, memorials, museums, all in an attempt to find some peace with the past. But I think now, as a young person at the event today said, the struggle is no longer for independence, it's for development.
So, Sharad, I just want to follow up on that. You know, I read that the economists, they put in their democracy index for 2018, they ranked Timor-Leste as the most democratic country in Southeast Asia. So have you seen that? Have you seen the democratic dividend be paid out in Timor-Leste?
Yeah, I mean, part of the democratic dividend, of course, is instability in politics, but the last couple of years have been fairly stable, hard at providing popular participation in development, and they try very hard to give voice to younger people, to ordinary folk. That is an aspiration they have. The reality is always, for shorter that I've been here too short a time to have my own independent assessment. But, beyond democracy is the question of jobs and the economy. Growth has been at 3.4% annually for some time, but it hasn't necessarily led to job growth. In fact, job growth has been largely led by the public sector, something that the government itself doesn't think is either sustainable or desirable. So they're looking for the private sector to come in. They sponsor a lot of cooperatives as a way of sort of also generating income and jobs and such. For a very young nation that needs to give young people a stake in the future.
Sharad, I see some parallels of that happening here as well, but I just want to highlight one particular clip that we have right now. It is of the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Cooperation of Timor-Leste. Let's pull up the clip.
Geografis Timor-Leste ada di ASEAN, dan dulu semasa Indonesia pun Timor-Leste adalah bagian dari ASEAN. Kemudian kedua, Timor-Leste telah diterima oleh semua negara ASEAN, di mana Timor-Leste telah mendirikan semua embassy di negara-negara ASEAN. Ketiga, ASEAN adalah sebuah region di mana ada penduduk sekitar 630 juta lebih, dengan sebuah pasar lebih dari 2,3 triliun dollars. Dan Timor-Leste merasa bahwa sangat cocok sekali bagi Timor-Leste untuk bisa juga menjadi bagian dari ASEAN. Di samping itu, secara geopolitik, Timor-Leste sudah sign Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, juga anggota dari ARF, dan juga banyak sekali konvensi.
Of course, Sharad, it has been 8 years since Timor-Leste has been formally asking to enter ASEAN. It has not yet been accepted. And of course, you spoke to the minister just now. What do you make of that conversation with him?
Well, he was putting the best and most positive face on the situation. It's been an unusually long time. It's been, I guess, since 2011. So we've had 8 years. They've been waiting for a word. Malaysia is very, very positive. Saifuddin Nasution said our foreign minister said that he's all for it. Saifuddin Abdullah, rather. But ASEAN is a consensus-based regional grouping. So some people are not convinced, partly because of the question of the uneven economic status of the different countries in the region, and East Timor being very tiny and very poor. Question is, how are they going to kind of integrate into the plan? Will they be able to deliver all the obligations they will have to deliver on? So I think Dionysius Babu Suarez, the foreign minister, went on that tour, as he said, to convince ASEAN that they are ready to be integrated and become the 11th member of the regional grouping.
Sharad, you mentioned a bit earlier that Timor-Leste really wants to focus on its economy. Now, if I'm not mistaken, the last 10 years, the Timor-Leste government's economic policies, have largely been shaped by the windfall in terms of their petroleum revenue. So they've got some wealth thanks to the oil reserves that they have. And they also have a sovereign wealth fund for this oil money, don't they? Are there parallels that you see to Malaysia? Are they learning lessons that we have had to learn the hard way?
Well, okay, so one of the things they've done is they subscribe to something called the Santiago Principle, which is about good best practices in terms of governance of sovereign wealth funds. That's something they're committed to. But I was just talking to somebody from the fund just now at the presidential palace, and he was saying to me the conversation about the purpose of the wealth fund has changed over the last 10 years. At least from his point of view, Norway is not an adequate comparison. Norway is very conservative in the way it deals with its oil wealth. And he's saying that as a country as young with huge developmental needs, they have to use the fund more proactively. Now, the question is, the balance between a conservative policy that doesn't squander the future for the present as opposed to ignoring the present and therefore not building your future. I think that was how he put it to me. That is the conversation that the Timorese are having today about their oil wealth.
Sharad, as much as I enjoy taking your place here in this show, I got to ask you when you're coming back, but of course, what are your main conclusions before you come back to KL, that is? What are your main conclusions? What are your main takeaways of your time in Dili?
Well, as somebody who was part of the solidarity movement in a case that perhaps people just assumed in the mid-90s, this was a hopeless case, and there was no chance that Timor would ever be free. It's a vindication for all those crazy people who stood outside embassies with candles. It's also crazy. It's a vindication for all those people who believe today that other territories haven't been decolonized. The president of the republic mentioned Western Sahara in his speech. We know, of course, that the Papuans are also struggling. From Irian Jaya, their protest today, and Indonesia has to think very carefully about its own response to the people of Papua, of West Papua, and also, we again Malaysians have to find the empathy for people who want self-determination. We do it for the Palestinians. Do we think about the others around the world? Western Sahara, West Papua, and all those other territories not decolonized that remain occupied.
All right, thanks, Sharad, for joining us today. We're looking back to having you here in the studio with us. So we're going to be back in just a couple of minutes, so stay tuned to consider this. Welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, with me Ibrahim Sani. Now here's what we want you to consider tonight. Ahead of Merdeka Day and Malaysia Day, Malaysia Kini, the news portal, had commissioned a survey on education and integration. Now some of the findings have been particularly interesting. So one of this is the one that stood out to me. About a sixth of Malaysians, that's 1 in 6 Malaysians, say they do not know about other religions and cultures and have no interest in learning more. What do you think about that, Ibrahim?
I think that's very, reflective, because when asked why the Malaysia Kini editor chose to lead with the 1 in 6 story instead of the 60% story, because there's another angle here. On the flip side, 60% of Malaysians say that they were familiar with other religions and other cultures. The Malaysia Kini editor says that because the 60% for a multicultural and multi-religious country is kind of expected. That's what he says.
She says. Idila Raza is the editor.
Pardon me. Right? But she didn't expect that 1 in 6.
So why lead with the negative, right? Especially, given what we're seeing, kind of race relations are slightly strained at the moment, especially with what's happening in the news headlines. So why lead with the negative? Now, exactly that, right? She says, well, it's expected. We are expected to be positive. The 60% is expected. But for her specifically, there was an option in the survey that says, well, I don't know much, but I'm willing to learn. Now, there were people...
I see. There's like an open-ended...
Yeah, there were people who chose not to take that option. In fact, they chose, I don't know much, but I don't care to learn. Now, that is the worrying part. So
it's
1 in 6 is quite worrying.
There's also another element here, because on Twitter, there's a very interesting individual here, 17-year-old Nur Amira Hassan. She tweeted something very interesting. Let's pull up that particular tweet of her asking that. So here it is.
You saw that on Twitter?
I saw that on Twitter.
So did I.
It has garnered over 10,000 likes. She's basically arguing or urging everyone to share a picture of themselves with their non-Malay friends. She also shared that this was one of the first time ever she had a friend who was of a different race.
What did you make of that, Ibrahim?
I think this is a very interesting story. I think this is great.
The way I see it is, it's like so essentially the conversation that came out of this, the debate that came out of this, where some people said, listen, this is tokenism, right? This is this entire thread essentially is perpetuating the deep-set narrative about race relations in Malaysia. That tokenism happens of non-Malays within a Malay majority society. That it normalizes certain myths about that there's hostility amongst races. But on the flip side, the other side, a lot of people said, listen, at least she's trying.
Yeah. There's also a focus I want to highlight here, because there's another tweet that goes on that says, if we are still perplexed, or we are taken into the stories of Malaysian of a different race helping out another Malaysian of a different race, and this becomes blown up on social media, it basically highlights one single point, and that one single point is that we haven't normalized the behavior of being nice to other people from other races, and that normalization has yet to happen even after 62 years of independence. And this is something that we need to ask ourselves, is this something that we need to perpetuate, or we have to normalize it as fast as possible?
Okay, so a wise philosopher once told me by the name of Sharad Kuttan, you may know him.
We just heard him just now.
I was having this conversation with him a while ago, and he said to me, it's about seeing it as where you benchmark, right? Do you benchmark from where we once were, or do you benchmark to where we want to be? So glass half full, glass half empty scenario.
No, I think I want to benchmark where we want to be, because whatever got us here may not get us where we want to be.
But you're not then, I guess, acknowledging the realities of some people. There are people with a reality that they don't have any non-Malay friends or friends outside their races. So for them to be trying and to acknowledge and to say, listen, I'm acknowledging. So I would say the 17-year-old Nur Amira is much better than the 1 in 6 person who did that Malaysia Kini survey and said, I don't know about other races and other cultures, and I'm not even willing to learn. At least Amira said she's trying.
And the fact that she's 17, the fact that she shows promise that a younger Malaysian is ready to take up the mantle and say, I'm ready to be nicer to other races, that gives us a lot of promise for...
I'm hopeful. I'm glass half full. What about you?
I'm always glass full. I'm 2/3 full. There you go.
You're a bit fuller than I am. All right. We're going to be back tomorrow at the same time, 10 p.m. So make sure you catch us then. I'm Melisa Idris, with me Ibrahim, Sani. Good night.